For 30 years, Toby Patrick's rusted red toolbox sat undisturbed on the highest shelf of his garage. He always told his children it held nothing but broken wrenches and dangerous rusted metal. He lied. When his daughter finally pried the heavy latch open, the dark, suffocating secret hidden inside would shatter her reality and tear their entire family apart. The rain in Oak Haven, Pennsylvania, had not stopped since the morning Toby Patrick was lowered into the earth. It beat against the windows of his modest, single-story colonial home with a relentless, drumming rhythm, mimicking the dull headache that had taken up residence behind Abigail's eyes. At 32, Abby to her patients at the local clinic, and always my little bird to her father, felt entirely untethered. She stood in the center of the living room, holding a half-empty mug of cold coffee, surrounded by the physical remnants of a man who had seemingly lived the simplest life imaginable. Toby Patrick had been a high school history teacher for 40 years. He wore tweed jackets with elbow patches, smoked a cherrywood pipe on the back porch, and spent his weekends tinkering in his garage. He was a beloved fixture in the community, a widower who had raised 3 children single-handedly after his wife succumbed to illness 2 decades prior. "We need to list it by the 1st of the month, Abby." The sharp, impatient voice belonged to David, her older brother. He was leaning against the doorway of the kitchen, furiously typing on his smartphone. David lived in Chicago, traded commodities, and hadn't been back to Oak Haven for more than Thanksgiving dinner in 5 years. His tailored charcoal suit looked distinctly out of place against the faded floral wallpaper of their childhood home. "He's barely in the ground, David," Abby said, her voice tight, straining to keep the exhaustion from bleeding into anger. "Can we at least wait a week before we start putting price tags on his life?" From the worn armchair by the fireplace, their sister, Eleanor, let out a soft sigh. Eleanor was a gallery director in Boston, perpetually draped in neutral cashmere and an air of detached superiority. "Abby, be reasonable," Eleanor murmured, not looking up from her tablet. "The market in this county is actually peaking right now. Dad wouldn't want us paying property taxes on an empty house. It's just bricks and wood. The memories are in our heads." Abby bit the inside of her cheek. It was easy for them to say. They had left. They had built lives far away from the quiet, suffocating borders of Oak Haven. Abby had stayed. She was the one who drove Toby to his doctor's appointments when his heart began to fail. She was the one who sat by his hospital bed, listening to his raspy breathing in his final days. "I'm going to start on the garage," Abby announced abruptly, setting her mug down on the coffee table with a loud clatter. She couldn't stand being in the same room as them right now. "Don't throw away the lawnmower, we can sell that," David called out as the screen door slammed shut behind her. The air in the garage was dense, smelling heavily of sawdust, dried motor oil, and the faint, sweet aroma of pipe tobacco. This was Toby's sanctuary. Pegboards lined the walls, every tool meticulously outlined in black marker, so it could be returned to its exact resting place. Jars of nails and screws were sorted by size on the workbench. It was a testament to an organized, predictable mind. Abby began pulling old tarps off a stack of cardboard boxes, the physical labor providing a welcome distraction from her grief. She sorted through old Christmas ornaments, brittle gardening hoses, and stacks of National Geographic magazines. Then she saw it. Tucked away on the highest shelf, wedged tightly between a spare tire and a box of winter coats, was the rusted red metal toolbox. It was a heavy, industrial-grade Craftsman model, its bright red paint flaking away to reveal deep brown oxidation. A heavy brass master lock secured the front latch. A memory flashed in Abby's mind, vivid and unbidden. She was 8 years old, chasing a stray tennis ball into the garage. She had climbed onto a stool, reaching for the bright red box, fascinated by the heavy lock. Suddenly, a hand had gripped her shoulder with surprising force. It was her father. His face, usually so gentle and crinkled with warm smiles, was pale and rigid. "Never touch that, Abigail," he had snapped, his voice rough and frighteningly cold. "It's just old, sharp metal. Broken things. You'll cut yourself and get tetanus. Leave it be. Promise me." He had never yelled at her before, and he never yelled at her again. She had promised, terrified by the sheer intensity in his eyes. For 24 years, she had kept that promise. But Toby was gone now. The rusted box sat there, a heavy anchor to a mystery she had long forgotten. Abby dragged an aluminum stepladder over to the shelf. The metal was cold and gritty under her fingertips. She grunted with effort as she pulled the toolbox free. It was shockingly heavy, far heavier than a few broken wrenches would warrant. She carried it to the center of the wooden workbench, a cloud of dust billowing up as she set it down. The brass padlock was completely seized with rust. Abby searched her father's meticulously organized pegboard and retrieved a pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. She positioned the thick steel jaws over the shackle of the lock, leaned her entire body weight onto the handles, and squeezed. Her arms trembled with the strain. For a moment, it wouldn't give. Then, with a sharp, echoing crack that made her flinch, the rusted metal snapped. Abby pulled the broken lock away, her heart suddenly hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She felt absurdly guilty, as if Toby might suddenly materialize in the doorway to reprimand her. She took a deep breath, hooked her fingers under the heavy metal lid, and pushed it open. The hinges screamed in protest, a harsh, scraping wail in the quiet garage. She peered inside, expecting the smell of rusted iron. Instead, the distinct, musty odor of old paper, damp leather, and something metallic and sharp hit her nose. There were no wrenches. There were no tools at all. Abby's breath caught in her throat. She took a step back, her hands flying to her mouth. The top tray of the heavy toolbox was packed end to end with tightly bound stacks of currency. But it wasn't modern money. They were thick, banded bundles of $100 bills, the older, smaller portrait designs from the 1980s. The paper bands holding them together were brittle and yellowed, stamped with the faded logo of a bank that had gone out of business 2 decades ago, First Mutual Trust. Abby's mind raced, struggling to process the impossible sight. Her father had lived on a meager teacher's pension. He had clipped coupons, driven a battered Volvo for 15 years, and had worried aloud about the cost of heating oil just last winter. There had to be over $100,000 sitting in this rusted box. With trembling hands, she reached in and lifted the metal divider tray to see what lay beneath. The bottom compartment held 3 items. First, a worn black leather journal, its spine cracked and peeling. Beside it lay a small, heavy object wrapped in a piece of dark velvet. And finally, a manila envelope, sealed shut. Abby pulled the velvet wrapping back first. It was a heavy, solid silver pocket watch. The glass face was shattered, frozen permanently at 11:42. But what made Abby's stomach drop was the dark, rust-colored stain crusted into the intricate engravings of the silver casing. As a nurse, she knew exactly what dried blood looked like. She turned the watch over. Engraved on the back were the words, "To Samuel, forever." "Samuel," she whispered aloud. The name meant nothing to her. She opened the black leather journal. The pages were filled with handwriting. It was her father's unmistakable, looping cursive, the same handwriting that had graded thousands of high school history essays, the same handwriting that had signed her birthday cards. But the words on the page were entirely alien. October 12th, 1988. The job in Bridgeport went south. He wasn't supposed to be there. God help me. He wasn't supposed to be in the shop. Richard panicked. We had to silence him. The blood. I can't wash it off my hands. I hid my share. I have to play the part now. I have to be the quiet man. Abby dropped the journal on the workbench, as if it had burned her. Her vision blurred. The job. Richard. We had to silence him. Was her gentle, patient father, the man who cried during sad movies, who rescued stray kittens, confessing to a murder? She grabbed the manila envelope. Her fingers, slick with nervous sweat, tore the paper open. A single Polaroid photograph fell out, along with a folded, official-looking document. The photograph showed two men leaning against the hood of a dark blue muscle car. One was, undeniably, a much younger Toby, his hair thick and dark, wearing a leather jacket and an arrogant smirk she had never seen on his face. The man next to him was tall, broad-shouldered, with a jagged scar running down his jawline. The document was a birth certificate. Name, Jacob Vance. Wait, skipping Vance. Name, Jacob Sullivan. Mother, Clara Sullivan. Father, Toby Patrick. Date of birth, August 14th, 1985. Abby felt the floor tilt beneath her. 1985. That was 3 years before Abby was born. It was while her father was supposedly happily married to her mother. Her father had a son, a secret family, a secret life steeped in violence and stolen money. Abby, did you fall in? The garage door rattled, and David stepped inside, waving a hand in front of his face to clear the dust. Christ, it smells like a tomb in here. Did you find the title to the Volvo? David stopped dead in his tracks. His eyes had locked onto the workbench. The stacks of aged $100 bills were impossible to miss, standing in stark contrast to the grimy wood of the table. What is that? David's voice dropped an octave, the polished, impatient tone entirely vanishing. He walked slowly toward the bench, mesmerized. Don't touch it, Abby said, her voice shaking. David ignored her, reaching out to pick up a bundle of bills. He flicked the edge of the notes. This is real. Abby, this is real money. There's got to be. Jesus, there's got to be 200 grand here. Where did you find this? In his toolbox, Abby replied, feeling completely detached from her own body. David, put it down. Look at the journal. Eleanor appeared in the doorway moments later, her arms crossed against the damp chill of the rain. What is taking you two so long? The realtor is calling in 10. She trailed off as she stepped fully into the garage, her eyes widening at the chaotic display on the workbench. Dad was sitting on a gold mine. David laughed, a sharp, manic sound. The old man was holding out on us. All those times I asked him for a loan for my first business, and he gave me a lecture on hard work. And he had this stashed away. Shut up, David. Just shut up and look, Abby finally yelled, slamming her hand down on the open leather journal. The sheer volume of her voice startled both of her siblings. Eleanor walked over cautiously, her eyes darting from the money to the bloody pocket watch. She picked up the watch, her manicured fingers turning it over. She read the inscription. To Samuel. Forever. Eleanor's face drained of all color. She dropped the watch onto the table with a loud clatter, backing away until her shoulders hit a stack of tires. Eleanor? What's wrong? Abby asked, stepping toward her sister. Oakhaven, Eleanor whispered, her voice barely audible over the rain on the tin roof. Do you remember the stories Mom used to tell us when we were teenagers? About the town curfew in the late 80s? Abby frowned. Vaguely. Something about a robbery. It wasn't just a robbery, Eleanor breathed, staring at the pocket watch as if it were a venomous snake. In 1988, the local jeweler was robbed. The safe was emptied of cash and loose diamonds. The owner was a man named Samuel Roth. They never found his body. The police presumed he was murdered, but the case went cold. The silence in the garage became absolute, suffocating. The three siblings stood in a triangle around the workbench, the rusted red toolbox sitting between them like an open grave. "You're crazy," David scoffed, though his voice lacked conviction. He dropped the bundle of cash back into the tray. Dad was a history teacher. He was the president of the PTA. He couldn't even fix a leaky faucet without calling a plumber, let alone pull off a heist and he couldn't bring himself to say the word murder. "Read the journal, David," Abby said quietly. David reached for the leather book, reading the entry aloud. "The job in Bridgeport." We had to silence him. His hands began to shake. He looked at the Polaroid. "Who is the other guy? The one with the scar?" "I don't know," Abby said. "But look at the birth certificate." David picked it up, his eyes scanning the official seal. "Jacob Sullivan. Father. Toby Patrick. Mum would have killed him." "Mum didn't know," Eleanor whispered, her eyes still locked on the bloody watch. "Or maybe she did. Mum had that nervous breakdown in '89. Remember? She spent 3 months in that facility in upstate New York. Dad told us she was just exhausted. What if she found out?" "This changes everything," David muttered, pacing the concrete floor. "If we turn this in, they'll seize the house. They'll freeze his assets. The victim's family will sue the estate. We'll get nothing. We'll be ruined." "Ruined?" Abby flared, her grief rapidly transmuting into furious disbelief. "David, our father might have murdered a man. He had a whole other child out there. And you're worried about the estate payout?" "I'm being practical, Abigail," David shot back. "He's dead. He can't go to jail. Samuel Roth is dead. What good does it do to drag our family name through the mud? We take the cash, we burn the journal, we throw the watch in the lake." "No." Abby snatched the journal off the table, holding it tightly against her chest. "I won't do it. I won't help cover up a murder." "Abby, give me the book," David warned, taking a step toward her, his posture aggressive. Before Abby could respond, the silence of the garage was shattered by the sharp, piercing ring of Abby's cell phone resting on the workbench. The caller ID flashed an unknown number. Abby hesitated, then picked it up. "Hello?" There was a heavy pause on the line. Then a man's voice, raspy and deep, spoke. "I saw the obituary in the paper today, Abigail," the voice said. "Your father and I had an arrangement that kept you and your siblings breathing. Now that Toby is gone, I expect his debt to be settled. I know you found the box." Abby's blood ran cold. Who is this?" "Ask him about the man with the scar," the voice chuckled darkly. "I'll be seeing you soon, little bird." The line went dead. Abby slowly lowered the phone, her wide, terrified eyes meeting the pale faces of her brother and sister. The nightmare hadn't ended with Toby Patrick's death. It was only just beginning. The dial tone hummed in the quiet garage, a harsh, electric buzzing that seemed to vibrate straight through Abigail's bones. She slowly placed the phone back onto the grimy workbench, her fingers lingering on the cracked screen as if to ensure the terrifying connection was truly severed. "Abby," David said, his voice stripped of its former arrogant polish. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing above his tight collar. "Who was that?" "He called me little bird," Abby whispered, her voice fracturing. "Only Dad ever called me that. He said he knows we found the box. He said he's coming to settle a debt." Eleanor let out a sharp, choked sob, pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes. "Oh my God. Oh my God. We're going to die here. Dad was involved with the mob, or a cartel, and now they're coming for us." "Stop being dramatic, Eleanor," David snapped, though his own pale complexion betrayed his rising panic. He lunged toward the workbench, his hands frantically scooping the bound stacks of faded $100 bills back into the rusted tray. "We are leaving. Right now. We pack the cash in the trunk of my Audi. We drive back to Chicago. And we forget we ever saw this God-forsaken town." "You can't be serious." Abby grabbed David's wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. Years of lifting patience had given her a quiet, wiry strength. "David, a man was murdered. You want to take blood money across state lines and just hope a psychotic killer doesn't track your license plate. It's 200 grand, Abigail," David roared, yanking his arm free. "Dad owed us this. For a lifetime of acting like a saint while playing us for fools. I am not walking away empty-handed. You touch that money, and I swear to God I will call Sheriff Brendan right now," Abby threatened, snatching the heavy bolt cutters from the table and brandishing them like a club. Her chest heaved. "I am not going to jail for Toby Patrick." David froze, his eyes darting between the heavy steel jaws of the cutters and his sister's fierce expression. The siblings stood locked in a desperate standoff, the rhythmic drumming of the Pennsylvania rain amplifying the tension. Before David could call her bluff, Abby turned her back on him and snatched the manila envelope containing the birth certificate. She stared at the name printed in stark black ink. Jacob Sullivan. "If this man on the phone knows about the box, he knows about Jacob," Abby said, her mind racing with a desperate, clinical focus. "Dad kept Jacob's birth certificate with a confession. Why? It's an insurance policy, or a warning." Abby pulled out her smartphone and began typing furiously into a public records database she occasionally used at the clinic to track down estranged next of kin. "What are you doing?" Eleanor asked, peeking out from behind the stack of winter coats. "I'm finding our brother," Abby stated flatly. The search took less than 5 minutes. Jacob Sullivan, born August 14th, 1985. There was a hit in a neighboring county, just 40 miles away in the city of Bridgeport, the exact city mentioned in their father's blood-stained journal. Jacob wasn't a criminal. He was a detective with the state police. Abby found a publicly listed number for his precinct and dialed. It rang 3 times before a deep, authoritative voice answered. "Detective Sullivan." Abby's breath hitched. "Jacob, my name is Abigail Patrick. Toby Patrick was my father." There was a profound, heavy silence on the line. When Jacob finally spoke, the professional veneer was entirely gone. "Toby is dead. I saw the obituary this morning. Did you find the red box?" "Yes," Abby choked out, tears finally spilling over her eyelashes. "And someone just called me. He said he's coming for us." "Listen to me very carefully, Abigail." Jacob's voice was suddenly urgent, commanding. "Lock every door. Do not call the local police. He has people on the local payroll. I have been building a case against him for a decade. His name is Richard Dawson. He's the man with the scar. I am leaving Bridgeport right now. Do not let him in." The line went dead. Abby looked at her siblings, the blood draining completely from her face. "We need to barricade the house," Abby said, her voice dropping to an eerie calm. "Now." For the next hour, the Patrick siblings moved like ghosts through the home they had grown up in. They deadbolted the front and back doors, pulled the heavy floral curtains shut, and dragged a heavy oak dresser in front of the hallway entrance. The house, once a beacon of warm memories and Sunday roasts, now felt like a claustrophobic tomb. Abby had transferred the money, the bloody watch, and the journal into her sturdy canvas medical bag, clutching it tightly to her chest as she sat on the living room floor. David paced the length of the worn rug like a caged animal, muttering to himself, while Eleanor sat frozen on the sofa, clutching a fireplace poker. Outside, the storm intensified. Thunder rattled the window panes. Then, over the howling wind, they heard it. The unmistakable crunch of heavy boots on the gravel driveway. The heavy brass knocker on the front door slammed once, twice, 3 times. "Abigail!" A raspy, booming voice called out from the porch. It was the man from the phone. "Richard Dawson. I know you're in there. I can see David's fancy car in the drive. Let's not make a mess of your mother's nice house. Open the door, hand over the journal and the watch, and you 3 can keep the cash. I just want my property." David stopped pacing. His eyes widened with greedy desperation. He looked at Abby's canvas bag. "Abby, give him the bag. We can keep the money. We can just walk away." "Are you insane?" Abby hissed, backing away from him. "He's not going to leave witnesses. He's a murderer." "I'm a businessman, Abigail." Richard's voice carried easily through the thick wooden door. "Your father was the murderer. Ask yourself why Toby needed that money in 1988. Your mother didn't have a nervous breakdown. Catherine had a severe psychotic break. She tried to drown you in the bathtub when you were an infant, Abby." Abby's heart stopped. The room spun wildly. "Toby didn't have the money for the private psychiatric facility," Richard continued, his voice dripping with poisonous amusement. "He begged me for a loan. I told him he had to work for it. He drove the getaway car for the jewelry heist. But Toby panicked. He grabbed a wrench and caved Samuel Roth's skull in when the old man fought back. I took the fall for the organization, but Toby kept the evidence to blackmail me into protecting his precious little family. Give me the book, or I will burn this house to the ground with you inside it." "He's lying," Eleanor sobbed, shaking her head violently. "Dad would never—" Suddenly, the sound of shattering glass erupted from the kitchen. David screamed as heavy footsteps thudded across the linoleum. Abby scrambled backward, clutching the medical bag, her eyes locked on the kitchen doorway. A figure stepped into the dim light of the living room. It wasn't Richard Dawson. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and held a matte black service weapon perfectly steady in his grip. He had Toby Patrick's dark eyes, but his jawline was sharp and hardened by years on the force. "Jacob," Abby breathed. Detective Jacob Sullivan gave her a curt nod, pressing a finger to his lips. He moved with practiced, silent lethality, stepping over the barricade and flattening himself against the wall beside the front door. "I'm losing my patience, Toby's little brats," Richard bellowed from outside. A heavy thud shook the door frame as he kicked it. The wood splintered around the deadbolt. Another violent kick, and the door flew open, crashing against the wall. Richard Dawson stepped into the hallway. He was an older man now, his hair thinning and grey, but the jagged scar slicing down his cheek was stark and terrifying. He held a heavy, suppressed pistol in his right hand. "Where is it?" Richard snarled, his eyes locking onto Abby. Before Richard could raise his weapon, Jacob stepped out from the shadows. "Drop it, Dawson," Jacob commanded, his voice echoing like thunder in the cramped hallway. "State Police, you're under arrest for the murder of Samuel Roth, extortion, and armed breaking and entering." Richard froze, his eyes widening, as he registered the detective. "Sullivan, you son of a—" Richard's arm twitched upward. Bang! The sound in the enclosed space was deafening. Abby screamed, covering her ears and dropping to the floor. When she opened her eyes, Richard Dawson was on his knees, clutching his shoulder, his weapon clattering harmlessly onto the hardwood floor. Jacob stood over him, his gun still raised, smoke curling faintly from the barrel. "It's over," Jacob said coldly, kicking Richard's gun away. He reached for his radio. "Dispatch, this is Detective Sullivan. Shots fired. Suspect is down. I need an ambulance and a cleanup crew at the Patrick residence." As the wail of approaching sirens began to cut through the stormy night, Jacob turned to look at the 3 terrified siblings huddled in the living room. He sighed, looking incredibly tired. "He was lying about your father killing Roth," Jacob said softly, holstering his weapon. "Dawson pulled the trigger. But your dad did drive the car, and he did hide the money. He kept the evidence to keep Dawson from hurting you. He lived in hell for 30 years, so you wouldn't have to." Jacob reached out his hand toward Abby. "I'm going to need that bag, Abigail." Slowly, her hands trembling, Abby handed over the canvas bag containing the rusted watch, the bloody journal, and the $200,000 of stolen cash. David slumped against the wall, weeping openly for the lost fortune, while Eleanor stared blankly at the shattered front door. Abby looked around the house. The floral wallpaper, the worn armchair, the scent of pipe tobacco. It wasn't a home anymore. It was a crime scene, a monument to a desperate man's sins. In the end, the Patrick estate was liquidated, swallowed by legal fees and restitution to the Roth family. David returned to Chicago, his ambition permanently bruised, while Eleanor threw herself into her gallery, ignoring the past. Abby stayed in Oak Haven. She lost her childhood home, but as she stood before her father's grave one final time, she finally understood the heavy price of a quiet man's devastating secrets.